Good morning and welcome to Ask the SCSA Thursday edition. And before we get started, my name is Joanne Davis and I am a safety advisor from the Regina office. And I just want to go through a couple housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded and will be available for later viewing. You may be joining us at the webinar itself or viewing us on Facebook Live. Welcome. If you have any questions, we do ask that you use the question and answer feature on this webinar. And you can also leave a comment in Facebook. Someone will be monitoring and forwarding questions to us. So let's go ahead and introduce our panelists for today. Mike, do you mind starting?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mike Moore. I'm Safety Advisor out of the Saskatoon office. Thanks, Joanne.
Thanks. Justin.
Hey, I'm Justin, Safety Advisor out of the Regina office.
Kelly, to you.
I'm Kelly Champagne, and I'm the Program Services Manager looking after the core CCAR, NCSO, and HSA programs.
Hey, and Adam.
I'm a trainer here at the SCSA.
Thank you. We may also have another guest from Program Services Auditor joining us shortly. We'll see if he can join us. So we're going to get started. I do believe we have a presentation from Justin. So he's going to get everything started up and take it away.
Okay, perfect. So we're going to be talking about emergency preparedness, specifically environmental preparedness. So safety in a nutshell is all about being prepared. Conducting pre-job safety assessments, inspecting offices and job sites while work is happening, ensuring machinery is inspected and maintained are a few ways we do our best to prevent incidents. But what about the weather? How our environment changes is completely out of our control. So don't let the weather cause long-term destructions on your construction site. Being prepared means having your equipment and workers ready for anything from a sudden rainstorm to freezing temperatures. These changes in weather are especially frequent in Saskatchewan. Preparing your construction site will reduce delays and prevent worker injuries. Construction site weather safety considers factors outside the site as well as maintaining safe conditions inside the work area. So we're going to go through some emergency preparedness legislation and a few other things here. So let's start with section 19.1. And read up as to where the law speaks to training for emergency preparedness. So in 19.1, an employer shall ensure that a worker is trained in all matters that are necessary to protect the health and safety of a worker when the worker, A, begins work at a place of employment, or B, is moved from one work activity or work site to another that differs with respect to hazards, facilities, or procedures. 2, the training required by subsection 1 must include A, procedures to be taken in the event of a fire or other emergency. We'll stop there on the legislation side of that. When you train workers, you want to ensure they are competent, and the legislation defines competency as a combination of knowledge, training, and experience. So it's not just important to tell your workers exactly what they must do during an emergency, but you have to practice it. Let everyone gain experience in what to do during an event before a surprise emergency forces them to act. It's all about those drills and skills. So I had mentioned in the last slide here, other emergency, as stated in the legislation, seems rather vague, and I kind of suppose it is. You know your job the best, so you should be aware of what weather-related hazards can affect you or your workers on your job site. Your location, the hazards involved, seasons, and how they are affected by the weather are all to be taken into account. Thunderstorms, extreme cold or heat, high winds, flooding are all examples of emergencies we need to prepare for, and thanks to modern day forecasting, we have a fairly good idea of when and where these emergencies will happen. Emergency preparedness means making sure you have the resources to deal with emergencies in the workplace. So take the time before an emergency to identify hazards your company may face. Be confident that you have the right equipment, materials, training, and procedures to respond properly. In the last slide, I spoke about being prepared before an emergency takes place. Sometimes our mind gets away from us and we can ask some pretty creative what ifs that could lead to quite a long list that may start to land vastly outside your company's scope of work. This isn't a bad thing at all. We should be considering things that could happen to our workers in any potential environment they can be placed in during the course of their duties. And after all, as a company owner or supervisor, you have a legal obligation to train your workers and inform them of hazards. Although I would never discourage a company from writing a preparedness plan for what to do in case of a meteor shower, I would spend my time on preparing procedures for possible thunderstorms. In section 22, under the Occupational Health and Safety Program, 22(1)(b) and C states in 22(1), subject to subsection 2, an occupational health and safety program required by section 13 of the Act must include, in B, the identifications of existing and potential risks to the health and safety of workers at the place of employment and the measures, including procedures to respond to an emergency that will be taken to reduce, eliminate, or control those risks. And in C, the identification of internal and external resources, including personnel and equipment that may be required to respond to an emergency. What this tells us is that the legislation not only tells us we have to train our employees on the what ifs, but we also have to train them with written down in our occupational health and safety program. So now we know that it's mandated by law to ensure our workers are trained in the company's emergency procedures that are within our safety program. But where else is it mandated that we prepare for other emergencies? The Saskatchewan Construction Safety Association's Audit Tool has some very specific sections on emergency preparedness. Let's take a few minutes to look into what the Audit Tool is asking for. The Audit Tool covers areas on emergency preparedness in section 11. Remember in the start of the presentation, we spoke on how you know your scope of work the best, and we have a responsibility to train your workers and ensure they practice emergency drills. The National Standard Core Program Audit Tool is looking for exactly that. In 11.1, they ask, are the emergency preparedness plans appropriate to work activities? For this, the auditor must judge if emergency plans are appropriate based on the company's scope of work, size of company, physical locations, number, frequency of personnel, etc. The auditor not only needs to see that the documentation is appropriate, but needs to see that you have taken the appropriate measures to protect your staff. In 11.2, it asks, does the plan include a requirement for training in emergency procedures, roles, and responsibilities? The emergency procedure policy must assign specific roles and responsibilities to personnel. So the worker, supervisors, subcontractors, etc. And provide appropriate training regarding emergency response plans. The emergency response policy must clearly state that the training will be provided. The auditor will also verify this through interviews that worker and supervisors are aware of their specific responsibilities, roles during an emergency. So let's spend a little bit of time on these two specific questions. So when it comes to your work activities, some questions you should be asking yourself. Do we work mainly inside or outside? If you only lay flooring in residential homes, having a policy for when to shut down a roof sheathing job due to high winds won't necessarily be required in your manual, as it does not fit your scope of work. Do we work in the city or outside the city? So for example, if you build homes on acreages or farms, you may not have somewhere to shelter away from a storm. This is something that has to be considered and prepared for. Is our work seasonal or do we work all year round? Working seasonally means that if you only do roofing from May to September, you may not require an emergency procedure for snowstorms. However, a policy on wind speed should be included. How many people are on site at any given time? Do you have enough room for all the workers in case of weather-related incident? What about a flash storm that rolls in? Can you shelter everyone? When it comes to creating these procedures, you know your company's scope the best, and we've spoken about that. You need to ask what possible weather-related incidents can negatively affect my workforce, and how can I better prepare them to act in case they do happen? These are just a few questions to ask when deciding if you meet the criteria asked in 11.1 with the core audit tool for weather-related emergency preparedness. So 11.2 asks a question about training in emergency procedures, roles, and responsibilities. When it comes to weather-related emergencies, it's very important to know who will be on your sites. Sub-trades, workers, supervisors, superintendents all have different roles and priorities. On your site, supervisors may be in charge of head counts by referencing sign-in books or directing trades as a fire captain. And superintendents may have other priorities like contacting emergency help or nearby sites or coordinating with trade partners. And I mean, keep in mind, these are, I'm speaking on large jobs. It all differentiates between large and small jobs here. Some jobs may not have a superintendent and only have a supervisor. When it comes to the subcontractors, you need to coordinate, between each company, as they all have different scopes of work and may require extra steps to ensure a safe response to an emergency. Coordination and communication between companies is key, and you need to organize and compare response plans. Ensure you have a program in place for training, not only during your company orientation, but also your site orientation, as it's imperative to emergency response system effectiveness for everyone on site. So now you have all your roles and responsibilities figured out for everyone on site, and your procedures are written that fit your scope of work. There is one very important step that cannot be overlooked. You need to test your emergency response plans. So when we go back to the audit tool, 11.3 asks, has the emergency response plan been tested for deficiencies and corrective action taken? This requires physically running through the emergency response plans on your job site or at your office and documenting the process. Does everyone know their job? Did they perform it correctly? What was the response time? Did we go to the proper muster point? Did everyone sign in upon arrival to the job site relative to the head count? Do alarm systems work? Were they in proper locations? Was communication sufficient? These are all the types of issues you'll be looking at to correct or improve upon during the documented system. Records must indicate the results of the test and what corrective actions were taken to correct the deficiencies. For example, on a large site, you may find that sounds from an air horn blown from the site trailer does not carry far enough to be heard on the other side of the job site. This would be noted during the test and corrective actions would be taken. This was a real situation during a large commercial build of a school. The corrective action was to implement a relay system in which an air horn was given 3 long blasts every 30 seconds until the next air horn was heard that was placed in the center of the job site. This was so that everyone could hear the air horn no matter where they were on the job. This increased the effectiveness of the emergency response system for the remaining duration of the job. So, where to go? Part of your orientation training should include a map of where your designated muster points are. The training should include how you communicate, which specific muster point workers will go to, depending on the type of emergency. On this map, there are 2 separate muster points. The muster point with the green and yellow star is the main muster point. The signal for workers to go to this muster point will be 3 long air horn blasts. The red and yellow star is for weather emergencies. The signal for workers to go to this muster point will be 3 short blasts from the air horn every 10 seconds. From there, workers will be protected from the elements due to the completion stage of this building. You may think that this is too confusing. However, training given during the orientation would explain the system to the workers. Then, periodically, through testing the emergency response system, you can determine how effective your training is and if you need to practice the emergency system more often to ensure that all workers remember the alarm signals. Again, this is all drills and skills. This is the best way to ensure that all your workers know what to do in case of an emergency. So, weather preparedness. So this section of the presentation will not be an entire guide to everything to look out for during a weather emergency. However, this will give you some idea on what to include in your procedures. Remember, if you're having trouble with the creation of these procedures, or you just need a little guidance, the advisory services team can help you out. So, thunder, lightning, and hail. Thunderstorms are often accompanied by high winds, hail, lightning, heavy rain, and in cases can produce tornadoes. Hail is formed when updrafts and thunderclouds carry raindrops upward into extremely cold areas of the atmosphere, where they freeze and merge into lumps of ice. Thunderstorms and lightnings occur throughout Canada, but less frequently in the north. On average, 10 people die each year in Canada, and up to 160 are injured during such storms. Thunderstorms are usually over within an hour, although a series of thunderstorms can last several hours. Hailstorms occur across Canada, mostly from May to October. They are most frequent in Alberta, southern prairies, and in southern Ontario. Some hailstones are the size of peas, while others can be as big as grapefruits. Hail comes down at great speed, especially when accompanied in high winds, and that can cause serious injuries and damage. So remember to include in your policy what to do if you're outside during one of these weather events. Some policies include the amount of time you must wait from the last rumble or thunder before everyone can go back to work. This is important detail in the responsibilities of your policy, especially who gets to decide when you go back to work. Tornadoes are nature's most violent storms. Spawned from powerful thunderstorms, tornadoes can cause fatalities and devastate neighborhoods in seconds. A tornado appears in a rotating, funnel-shaped cloud that extends from a thunderstorm to the ground with whirling winds that can reach 300 miles per hour. Damage paths can be in the excess of 1 mile wide and 50 miles long. Some tornadoes are clearly visible, while rain or nearby low-hanging clouds obscure others. Occasionally, tornadoes develop so rapidly that little, if any, advance warning is possible. Before a tornado hits, the wind may die down and the air may become very still. Tornadoes generally occur during the trailing edge of a thunderstorm. It's not uncommon to see clear, sunlit skies behind a tornado. When you think of tornadoes, you're probably more likely to think of Bill Paxton than Saskatchewan. However, in Saskatchewan, there were 13 tornadoes by July in 2019. The province averages 18 per year. A tornado that flattened a northwest Saskatchewan campground on June 29, 2019, was rated by Environment Canada as an EF1. Tornado is rated EF1 when it reaches winds of 138 to 177 kilometers per hour and causes moderate damage. The highest rating is an EF5. It is vital to have procedures that outline what to do if you are in a structure or outside with no shelter. Communication before and after an event, such as a tornado, is crucial to preparedness. Flooding. So floods are the most frequent natural hazard in Canada. They can occur at any time during the year and are most often caused by heavy rainfall, rapid melting of a thick snow ice pack, ice jams, or more rarely, the failure of a natural or man-made dam. The heavy rainfall can result in flooding, particularly when the ground is still frozen or already saturated from previous storms. Flash flooding, in which warning time is extremely limited, can be caused by hurricanes, violent storms, or dams breaking. Many Canadian rivers experience flooding at one time or another. Potential for flood damage is high where the development on low-lying, flood-prone lands. For those that remember, July 2016, Estevan, Saskatchewan was hit with over 130 millimeters of rain in just over 2 hours. This can happen extremely fast. It's important to know how to prepare for floods if one is forecast or imminent. Your procedures should also cover what to do if you need to evacuate and what to do after a flood. Re-entering a work site to dewater and ensuring building safety should be covered as well, as most companies do handle this part themselves on site. Winter preparedness. Severe storms are events that can affect all communities and construction sites at any time within Saskatchewan. Environment Canada tracks all weather systems in order to mitigate their potential effects, but some severe storms can strike without notice and have long-lasting effects in our region. They can take on many forms: thunderstorms, hail, blizzards, ice storms, and heavy rain, developing quickly and threatening life and property. Your policy should include what to do when a winter storm approaches and when it may be time to pack up and head home. Like any storm, there are levels to each one, and some may not be as extreme as others. Generally speaking, winter storms are predictable, but you should still be prepared and know what to do in case one surprises you. When it comes to the cold, the legislation has some key pieces of information that you should make sure are covered in your policies and procedures. When working alone or traveling, you need to be prepared for the cold temperatures. In working alone or at isolated places of employment, Section 35(4)(b)(6) states that you need to ensure that there's a provision for emergency supplies for use in traveling under conditions of extreme cold and other inclement weather conditions. Section 70 goes over thermal conditions and speaks to monitoring thermal conditions, providing shelter, heating and cooling equipment, provision of hot or cold drinks, limited work schedules with rest and recovery periods, frequent observation of workers by a person trained to recognize the symptoms of psychological stress resulting from extreme temperatures, and again, the provision and emergency supplies for use when traveling under extremely cold or inclement weather conditions. There are apps that have been created to help us stay connected and prepared. One of them is the Government of Saskatchewan's Emergency Alerts app. It's a free app that can be downloaded from the Apple Store or Google Play. Sask Alert is the Government of Saskatchewan's emergency public alerting program that provides critical information on emergencies in real time so that you can take action to protect yourself, your family, and your property. Alerts can be issued by Environment Canada, Government of Saskatchewan Ministries, Crowns and agencies, as well as participating municipalities and First Nations. Weather alerts, which are issued by Environment Canada, may include tornadoes, watches, and warnings, and any warnings issued for blizzard, blowing snow, dust storms, extreme cold, freezing drizzle, freezing rain, heat, rainfall, severe thunderstorms, snowfall, wind, and winter storms. Alerts issued by the province as well as by local municipalities and First Nations may include wildfires, flooding, train derailments, power outages, drinking water advisories, local emergency declarations, community outages, road closures, and evacuations. Critical emergency alerts can be received through all radio and TV broadcasters licensed to operate in Saskatchewan by wireless alerting to your mobile device through the Sask Alert website, the Sask Alert app, and the Weather Network. Advisory emergency alerts can be received through the saskalert.ca website, the Sask Alert app, and the Weather Network. So the SCSA has also created a medical facilities locator that you can use your cell phone location to find facilities near you. This can be a very valuable system in setting up your emergency response system. A great thing that we do often is for every job, you set up an emergency listing with the nearest hospital. So this can be a great app to use if you're in a location that's not necessarily familiar to you, to where you can find your nearest locations. Max Mayfield is an American meteorologist who served as the director of the National Hurricane Center from 2000 to 2007. He had once said that preparation through education is less costly than learning through tragedy. Having a plan that your worksite is trained in, has practiced, and that is effective brings you one step closer to mitigating the potential expense. Financial impact a weather-related incident can cause to a construction site is potentially very high, but an injury or death that could have been prevented with proper planning is the ultimate price. So again, if you have any questions about creating your emergency preparedness system, please feel free to speak to an advisor. I don't know why it's skipped like that, but I'm all done.
Thank you, Justin. That's a lot of great information on emergency preparedness. There's quite a bit of responsibilities that employers do have in putting in place and protecting their workers. I do want to welcome Jason, if you'd like to introduce yourself. Welcome.
Hi, everybody. SCSA. Thanks for having me.
Okay, we are now going to go to our question and answer segment of the SCSA. Sorry. Here's a relevant question. It's pretty windy out there the last few days. We had some workers on a rooftop. How windy is too windy? When should we shut down? What is some advice we can give to this member?
Yeah, I mean, just looking outside right now, I mean, it's fairly windy. Joanne, I know, you worked as a carpenter for a long time and still do some carpentry work. I worked as a carpenter for a little over a decade, and just about everybody at the SCSA has some experience with carrying plywood when you've got 60-kilometer wind gusts, and it's just not safe. So again, like I mentioned in the presentation, that your scope of work the best. When we're determining in the level of hierarchy, level of control and eliminating hazards, the big one is, can we just eliminate the hazard altogether? Do you need to be on the roof today with hauling plywood on a really windy day, right? So, I mean, there's no definite answer. There are some tables that are available that give you some suggestions on when it's too windy, but it's all about knowing your scope of work. And again, this emergency preparedness doesn't just speak to when to shut down, but you can also include things like, what can we do at our jobs when it's too windy for this? So that if all of a sudden the wind is gusting to 90 miles an hour, hey, you know what? Maybe we have another job that's inside. Maybe we can do some cleanup, or we can prep something for, we may not need it right now, but we're going to need these walls built. Let's stay on the ground, build these walls for a job that's coming up, and then we can prepare that way. So yeah, that's a great question.
Thank you, Justin. I have another one here related to being prepared. One of the things in legislation and that we do check as well during our audit procedure is how many first aiders do we need on site? We're a smaller commercial site with about 16. So maybe we can give some information on where they can find this information. Who would like this one?
I'll jump in on this one. So in legislation, you guys might have seen me flipping through some of this stuff. I was looking at some of the legislation required to these questions. And Table 9 of the legislation tells us first aid requirements, tells us how many people, what kind of stuff we need, and that's in the regulations of the ledge at the back portion of it. So, oh, look at there. And there's the whole table right there. So 16 people, if we look over to the top, it says workers, and then it tells you half an hour, a distance, and then it says a half an hour to 2 hours, and then more than 2 hours. This is talking about a medical facility. And then down on the left-hand side, you got the number of workers. So you just have to work out how many workers you have and how far away you are from a medical facility would tell you what you would need. So in this case, 16 people. So if we went down between 10 and 20 people, workers, we would need minimum plus a Class A attendant and any other supplies. So what's minimum? Well, if you look at the very top of this table, it says Table 9, and then it says Summary of First Aid Requirements. Just below that, it tells you minimum and the definition, which is a first aid kit containing stuff that you would see in a first aid kit that Table 10 lays out for us, which isn't a big deal. So in that case, we just need a minimum, so a first aid kit, plus somebody who has a Class A first aid, plus any supplies that they would need.
Thank you, Adam, for that information. That is right. And it also, don't forget that they have to be available during regular work hours. So a lot of times you find companies will have more than one person trained, and we'll have that way in case somebody's not there on vacation or so on, that there's always somebody available. Okay. Here's a question on hazards and risk. How is a risk different from a hazard? And what kind of paperwork do I need? And the forms, what forms do I use to look at risks and hazards? Mike?
Yeah, Joanne, thanks. It's a good question. It's a really, I find that to be an extremely interesting question in safety, because I think a lot of times, a question like this may be a result of someone having a field level risk assessment, a field level hazard assessment, using these terms interchangeably almost. But when we really look at the hazard and the risk as two different items, your hazard is going to be the thing that can potentially hurt you. It's going to be the unavoidable circumstance, like the hazard would be if I'm working on a roof, the unavoidable or potential fall off of that roof. That's the hazard, and then subsequently hitting the ground or whatever's below. The risk is more the likelihood of that happening. So I have the hazard of falling off the roof, but what is my risk? Now, the risk varies depending on the roof you're on or the situation you're in. Is it windy out? Back to that emergency preparedness piece. So on any given day, your hazard may be the same, but your risk may be different. And it's really good to assess both of those things, no matter what kind of form we're using or whatever it is. And a lot of forms use like a priority index to look at the probability, the severity of a hazard, to basically then indicate how severe, like what's the likelihood and how severe is this hazard, and what's the outcome going to look like, and then you can put appropriate controls in place. Again, that's the use of, it's nice to have practices and procedures for all the work that we perform on site, And that, but then we also do have to look at the particulars of the day. And that's where those hazard assessments and those daily check-ins and assessment of my work site come into play, because on any given day, a procedure used in one environment may be different than a procedure used in a different environment, and the risk and the hazard may fluctuate. So we want to always be checking in and assessing those things so that we always have the proper controls in place for those hazards.
Thank you, Mike. And again, if you're having any questions with like how to maybe assess your hazards and assign a risk to them, and with controls, you can speak to one of the advisors, and we could help you on specific matters. When we have more of an example, we'd be able to go a little bit more into it. I do have a couple questions here that we're going to shift over to some program services questions. If someone's looking for completing their NCSO, how many courses do we have online? So I guess it's program services and training we're going to go to. And are they always going to be available online? And the last part, I'll save the last part of the question till those two have been answered.
Okay, I'll start, and then Adam can jump in when I say something that might not be entirely correct. Yes, many of our courses for the NCSO program are now being offered online. Safety management, safety auditor, leadership for safety excellence, Scott, how am I doing here? SCSA Fall Pro. So all of that is now being offered online, and I'll let Adam talk to in terms of how often they are being offered. We are working on other courses to getting them up and delivered for instructor-led online training as well. Over to you, Adam.
Sure. Yes. Thanks, Kelly. All right. So as far as the classes that are being offered right now, Kelly named off a bunch of them. We still have more and more coming. So the two that I know for sure that are not up but will be soon is WMIS and claims. So we're doing a little bit of change with those ones, making sure that they're up to snuff when it comes to online training. And then once those are ready, we're going to be offering those. Essentially what I've been telling people is keep on checking our calendar, call your advisor, find out what classes we've added. The classes are being offered more and more. We're moving through the hiccups of teaching on Zoom right now. So give us a little bit of time, but we will have all of the classes that you need for NCSO online and HSA.
Hey, thank you. And the last part of this question was, how long does it usually take to complete the NCSO process from start to finish? And then during COVID as well, we can take a look at that part. Who would like to answer that one?
I can talk to that a little bit. A lot of it will depend on how motivated you are. There is, once you register for the NCSO program, there is no time limit by which you have to complete all your courses and write the exam. So, I mean, if you learn at a pace where it takes you 5 years to get through this, that's fine. If you're extremely motivated and you can get all your classes in, you can write the exam as quickly as you can get through all the classes. In theory, you probably could get your NCSO in regular circumstances within 3 to 4 months. However, during COVID, it's going to be a little bit more challenging. And so that will all depend on our delivery schedule of when we can deliver the courses. And I wish I had a crystal ball and could tell you exactly when all that's going to happen. But again, so like I said, if you're motivated and you're ready to learn and we can offer all the classes, you should be able to do it fairly quickly.
Thank you, Kelly. Yes, the NCSO program can take some time. Again, if you want to go after it, make some time, take a few classes online, and more will be coming out. And definitely a great tool for you in the industry. Another question here about LSE proficiencies and self-audits. We talked about someone finished their LSE course a few months ago, and they do have proficiency. They want to know, how do they hand that in when the office is closed? And then they also mentioned that they have an auditor self-audit that goes with that auditor class. And can it be emailed? Or dropped off? So who would like to expand?
I can talk.
Okay, Adam?
I was helping some students earlier today and yesterday on this. So as far as the LSE proficiencies is concerned, we have an email address, and you can find that on SCSA Online, but it's LSE proficiencies at scsaonline.ca. Once you're done doing your toolbox talk, your worksite inspection, and your investigation of an incident, you can just email that directly to the LSE Proficiencies email. And again, it's LSE Proficiencies at scsaonline.ca. I'm saying that pretty quick, but check us out on SCSA Online, our actual website. That email's there too, and you can find some fun stuff there as well. As far as the self-audit, there is an email address, and I believe that's, well, Kelly, is it program information or information?
You're
Kelly.
so close. You are so close. It's SCSA program info at scsaonline.ca. You can scan and email us your self-audit, or we will also accept it if you mail it into our office as well.
Okay, thank you. Yes, we can still accept our self-audits and proficiencies. Okay, so here is a question. Maybe Jason would be able to answer this one. I operate a plumbing company and we have an emergency policy posted at the office. Do I need one on all work sites? So when you're out and auditing, do you look for them at the work sites as well?
There we go. My mute button's very sticky. Yes, you do have to have it accessible and available for the workers on the work site. Yeah, so we will look for them there.
Okay,
That's
thank you,
everything.
Jason. Yeah, so it's important to make sure that all your workers are trained and or have them available as well. One more NCSO question here. Let's go to this one. I completed a couple of courses and now I have moved to BC. Am I able to complete my NCSO there? Will my courses be recognized?
So I don't really have a good answer for that, or I do have a good answer. I just don't know if it's going to be a very informational one. What you'll have to do is you'll have to contact the BC Construction Safety Association and talk to them, give them your certificates and show them what you've got, and they will determine whether or not they accept those courses as equivalency. If they have any questions, they will get in touch with us with regards to the course content and just, you know, to confirm that you actually have taken it. But you will have to contact that association that you're going to find out if they will accept it.
Okay, Kelly, I believe I have, get you one more here. Does the NCSO have an expiry date? And how do we maintain our NCSO?
Yes, it does have an expiry date. Once you write the exam and you've passed it and you get your certificate, your cert is good for 3 years from that date. And then at the end of that 3 years, you have to contact us and we will recertify you again for 3 years. And what you have to confirm with us is that you have maintained all your certifications. So if you had anything such as first aid or something which expired during that 3-year period, that you have renewed that, as well as you will have to complete a maintenance audit or a core audit during those 3 years, and we would have to have a record of that as well. So once those are met, then we just basically roll over and issue you another certificate, and it's good for another 3 years.
Okay, thank you. And again, if you have any questions on that, you can contact your advisor as well as program services. And I do want to let you know that we do have those links now posted in the chat. We did mention the 2 links for the LSE and then the program services link where you can ask questions as well as submit your self-audit. So I'm going to go back to your question here about bad weather. Can I refuse work in bad weather? Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I'll take that one. In any given situation, again, any given situation, if the situation elevates itself to being unusually dangerous, whether that's you're trained in an operation of a skid steer, but not the specific model that you're asked to drive on a given day, or you're going to be sheeting the roof like Justin was talking about early, which is you have a procedure in place for sheeting the roof. You have your PPE in place and all that. But if wind conditions change and you're expected to bring OSB on the roof and start laying it out, and you know that that this situation is unusually dangerous due to the wind conditions, and that absolutely these are the greatest conditions. The whole point of the right to refuse is a way to ensure that workers aren't just blindly moving forward, and workers have a say in their safety. So a supervisor says, sheet the roof, and then so the crew starts sheeting the roof, and a wind comes up, and as we know, the calm before the storm. So the supervisor's there, it's nice and calm, everything's nice. Supervisor goes to another job site and leaves. Maybe it's across town, maybe it's out of town, who knows? And the wind picks up, and there's workers left on site. Someone's there directing the work of the workers, but potentially they're not making all the final calls. Potentially the supervisor that left is the one that makes a lot of the calls and stuff. That crew needs to assess the situation and say, you know what, something's changed, something's elevated. We're now in a condition that we would call unusually dangerous. And any responsible manager or supervisor would appreciate a situation where a worker comes forward or a crew comes forward and says, this situation has changed, or there's something going on here where it's unusually dangerous. We don't have proper training, the weather conditions have changed. We need to shut it down, or we need to reassess how we can do this job safely. I feel like any reasonable person would appreciate and does appreciate that kind of refusal of work. So.
Thank you, Mike. That's a great answer to that question. A very important question. When should we be looking at refusing to work? Situations change fast, and sometimes you're the one who has the best information on that. You need to go speak to your supervisor. That's really excellent. I got a few questions here on fire extinguishers, so maybe we can have an auditor's point of view as well on this. Do we need to inspect our extinguishers monthly? And another one I have here is they're working in an apartment building. Should they be on each floor? So kind of, when should they be inspected? What are you looking for there? How many are required? Maybe some insight on that would be great.
For Joanne, I can try to touch on that. Of course, you have to check with your local fire code. I can't answer that. I don't know that answer off the top of my head, but of course they do have to be available on site. For the size, you'll have to check, or I'll have to check. They definitely have to be available on site, and the appropriate size and class for the job that is being performed.
Can I just add something real quick to Jason's? Sorry, Jason, you were cutting in and out there. So what he was saying there, just so everybody heard, check with your local fire department what the code is for your buildings. But I know in legislation, if you check out section 361, it says an employer, contractor, owner shall ensure that portable fire extinguishers are selected, located, inspected, maintained, and tested so that the health and safety of the workers at the place of employment is protected. It also adds a little bit, the employer, contractor, owner shall ensure that portable fire extinguishers are placed not more than 9 meters away from an industrial open flame portable heating devices, tar, pot, asphalt kettles. It also talks about each welding or cutting operation in progress as well. So in legislation, it gives you a little bit of information about your fire extinguishers there, but anything more than that, just like Jason said, you got to check with your fire code.
Yes, thank you. And that does answer another question that we had here, that they noticed trades conducting work that were creating sparks. So depending on the work, and then is there a fire extinguisher needed? So according to legislation, of course, if you're welding and creating that hazard, you would need to have one fairly close to that workstation. And again, it is very dependent on the type of work you're doing, and that's going to dictate what size and what kind of fire extinguisher you need. And then that's what we're going to be looking for in that core process, and going through making sure that they're inspected regularly and maintained, as well as that they're appropriate for the job activity. That's a great question. I have a question here on working alone. My supervisor often leaves me working on the site by myself. Do I need extra training on working alone? So this is more of a legislative question as well, and the requirements. Okay, Adam.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Working alone, section 35 of the legislation. Oh, I love this ledge talk. So working alone, it says in this section, to work alone means to work at a work site as the only worker of the employer or contractor at the work site in circumstances where assistance is not readily available, and so on. So where a worker is required to work alone in an isolated place of employment, an employer or contractor, in consultation with the committee or the representative, or where there is no committee or representative, a worker shall identify the risks arising from the conditions and circumstances of the work or of the worker's work or the isolation of the place of employment. So an employer contractor shall take all reasonably practicable steps to eliminate or reduce the risk identified in subsection 2. And then it just goes through all that, the steps to be taken. So you need radio communication or cell phone communication, any other means to provide effective communication because of those risks. And it just keeps on going. So may include the following: regular contact by the employer contractor with the worker working alone. So there's really no training working alone, but there is steps that you do need to follow. And the biggest thing is communication. So essentially you're going to come up with a scenario of like every half an hour, every hour, whatever it might be, to contact your supervisor, your manager, your employer, whoever it might be. Or vice versa, that they would be contacting you. But essentially that's the biggest thing, and make sure that you have all your PPE, any rescue procedures that you might need working alone as well.
Joanne, if I could just piggyback on that a little bit from a documentation standpoint as well. One thing that works really well, now this is all obviously dependent on your site. Things I've done in the past was create documents that outline your working alone policy. And if you have, say, trade partners or your own workers that will be working alone, some training that goes into what the communication level you expect, what you expect of your subcontractors, and then filling out individual policies, or sorry, individual pieces of documentation that state when. So from my past life working as a carpenter for a commercial company, what we used to do is, if a company had to come in on the weekend to complete some work, whether or not it was because it was using maybe a hazardous chemical that could be hazardous to other employees on site, or just purely they needed the whole space to do a project to get it done over the weekend, we would have them fill out a working alone form. What this stated was our requirements as far as company requirements that were above legislation, as well as the legislation requirements. And then we had the names of the people that would be working alone, and all documentation required under there to make sure that there was first aid personnel on site, that everyone had tickets for pieces of equipment they'd be operating, and all the phone numbers were provided for superintendents or foremen or supervisors, all that kind of stuff. So again, with the theme of today, preparing for those emergencies, putting everything in place, asking yourself what are the what ifs? Do we have people working at heights? You should never really have someone alone working at heights. I mean, the biggest thing that we always talk about in our fall protection classes, and I mean, Adam can back me up on this, or anybody really on the panel, is that if you were to fall in a situation where you were in a fall protection harness and there was no one there to help you, and if you are technically following all the rules and you have no cell phone in your pocket, what position are you in now to get help? If you don't have something written up and followed, that you have someone checking in on you or whatever, right? So these are all very important questions, and I'm glad this question was brought up and asked, because it is important to be prepared for these situations.
I'll chime in on this one too. Our app, Guide to OHS legislation, on there, if you scroll down, we have a lot of good information on key topics, and working alone is one of those key topics that we have on our app. So for anyone asking this question or wondering about, where do I find out some easy to read information, our app really breaks it down and really digs into some of the legislation and puts it into a very readable format and brings some information together. So I would highly recommend downloading our app, and you can, right at your fingertips, you can have a lot of this good information.
Thank you. Yes, we have a lot of great information on that. That was a really good question. I'm going to go back to a couple NCSO questions. I'm going to put them together. I think I have a few here. One of them is, when they're starting SCSO, is there an order to take your classes, whether it be for core, for NCSO? What kind of experience qualifies you for NCSO? And is there a study guide? So maybe if Kelly and anybody else who wants to join in the conversation wants to add to that, can answer that, would be great.
I can start. First of all, on the experience, the NCSO is a boots on the ground designation for the worker who's working in construction. So that means that your experience has to be obtained in the construction field. So if you are a person, let's say, who is the safety administrator and you're working out of the office, this is not the designation for you. That designation is the health and safety administrator, which is the same as the HSA, but without the experience. The NCSO, you require 3 years of construction experience that's been obtained in the last 10 years. And what we will require is a letter of from your employers where you gained that experience, saying how much experience you had. If you had a sort of a hybrid job where you were in the office and on the field, you'd have to give us a percentage of what time was spent in the field. So that's what's required for experience. And I am going to toss it over first to Adam to say what the prerequisites are for all the courses. And then we're going to toss it over to Jason after that, because Jason can talk about how you can prepare for the test, because he's seen many people write the test. But I will say there is a study guide on our website that you're able to download and take a look at. So Adam, if you want to talk about the prereqs for the courses right now.
Sure. There's 12 courses you got to take. 10 of them are mandatory. 2 you get to pick from, I believe, a pocket of 4 or 5 classes. H2S, first aid, which we don't offer those ones. So if you take them somewhere else, as long as you provide the proof of you taking those classes, the certification. Our people in program services would take a look at it and approve it most likely, and those would be the 2 electives, giving you your full 12 classes. There are some classes that you have to have before other ones. With that, if you are going to be signing up for NCSO, and I really suggest everybody should, when you register, you'll get a list of all the classes that you need to take. In that time, we would let you know which class would have to be taken first before another one. I don't know for sure which ones those ones are, but we do have a list here.
Sorry, Adam, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. One of the classes you want to take very early on is safety management, because you'll have to take that before you take your safety auditor. And then following that, you're going to make sure that you have your WMIS and you have LSE as well before you take the final course, which is essentially safety administration. So all the other courses, it doesn't matter what order you do them in, but those ones you have to make sure you have all of those ones in place and completed by the time that you take safety admin. So Jason, you want to talk about some tips for preparing for the NCSO exam?
Okay, I can give them a couple tips, but not too many. I'm going to give you only one tip. Study a little bit if you have spending time in safety. Use the study guides from us, and also when you're writing the exams, when you think you've written enough, write a little more. That's my tip for you.
I'd like to just add one quick thing. One of the things that I do know for a fact is if you are going for NCSO, if you can get those classes done kind of in a row, 3, 4, 5 months of just trying to get the whole 12 classes done, all that information's fresh in your head. taking the test right after you got the 12 courses done would probably be the most benefit for you. If you take your 12 courses, then you wait a year before you take the test, you know, a lot of that information starts maybe going away, or you might be getting confused. Best bet is if you can take that test as soon as you're done those 12 courses.
And Jason had mentioned using the preparation guide. If you go to on our website, scsaonline.ca/program, so you go to the program section and then NCSO, you'll see that the study guide is available. So just bring it up on my screen. You just go down from the video, you'll have the link here to the preparation guide. Click on that link and you'll have our entire preparation guide for the NCSO exam.
Thank you. And again, we have those links posted in the chat. We have a couple more links there that we were just talking about. Thank you so much for that information on the NCSO program. That's great. I'm going to go back to a couple questions I had earlier, and we won't necessarily go into it, but it is going to bring me into what we're doing next week. We had a couple questions on asbestos. How do I figure out the risk level of asbestos? How much of it is dangerous? At what level? Is there training for asbestos? And what do I do if I think there's asbestos on site? So what I want to let you know is that next Tuesday, the SCSA is going to host an asbestos awareness panel for the construction industry. We are going to have Dr. Paul Demers from the Cancer Care Ontario and David Cancrate from the Associated Asbestos Abatement, a division of Place Crate Systems, a core certified company, as well as a representative from the Ministry of Labor Relations and Workplace Safety. So we're going to be getting into asbestos next week, as well as if you have questions, you can pre-submit them to us at com@scsaonline.ca. That's COMM@scsaonline.ca. So we are going to have a special Ask the SCSA on Tuesday, and with a lot of great information. We're going to have some experts on the panel, and I really encourage you to submit your questions early to get them in, as well as joining us either on Facebook Live or on the webinar itself. So I want to take this time to thank our panelists. Thank you to all of those viewing us today, and those who will be viewing it later. Thank you for joining us. Do forward your questions to us. We will get to them, and if not, feel free to contact us, advisors here at the SCSA, and anybody else from the program services as well in training. Again, thank you. That last link was actually just posted now, so go ahead and grab that before we sign off, and we'll see you next week.